Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, today I have a list here, and this is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about players that suck. Now, I don't get to do this very often. Most of my videos are telling you who to draft, how to draft, instructional videos, who to draft, who to fade based on ADP and everything like that. But I very rarely get to talk about players that just suck at football. So I'm going to enjoy this one. Now, I made a video about a week and a half ago talking about players to avoid, but a lot of players on that list were really good players. I just don't like their ADP. But the players on this list, I'm fed up with people trying to make a case for drafting these guys because they honestly just suck and they're not good for fantasy. And no matter what their ADP is, you need to fade these guys altogether. So I'm going to start right here with the first player on my list, and that is Cam Akers. Now, we know that Cam Akers is coming off a torn Achilles, right? And this is the most unrecoverable injury for any running back. We have this is proven over years and years of fantasy football. Running backs do not ever come back from a torn Achilles and have an awesome career and put up a lot of fantasy points over a consistent amount of time. And we haven't seen anything from Cam Akers. Look, this dude has never averaged more than 4.3 yards a carry in a season. In his last full season last year, only averaged 4.2 yards a carry, which was 43rd in the NFL. Now, I'm very aware that late in the season, he had kind of a mini breakout. And in the last 5-6 games, he was a monster. But we have to keep in mind that the Rams weren't competing at that point. They weren't trying to win. Cooper Kupp was hurt and out for the season. Matt Stafford was dealing with the elbow and the neck and everything like that. So, this team was not fully functional at that point in the season. They had nothing to do other than hand Cam Akers the ball and let him run. And we know that he had his volume because of this. When Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford come back 100%, Cam Akers isn't going to be nearly involved in the offense. And you might say, well, hey, now the offense is going to be efficient and give him more touchdown scoring upside. This is true. But the problem is he is completely touchdown dependent. He's not shown to have good enough efficiency in the running game or any sort of pass catching volume. Last year, this dude had a 4% team target share. In his last season where he played 13 games, almost a full season, he had a 3.1% target share back in 2020. He has no involvement in the passing game, zero. He's coming off a torn Achilles. He's in an offense where pretty much any running back in the backfield is touchdown dependent because they just don't run their offense through their backfield. It's a pass-first attack. They run their offense through Cooper Kupp. That's the way the offense works. And unless Cam Akers gets super lucky and scores 13 or 14 touchdowns, there is no way he gets the same production as the running backs that are going around him, like Pacheco and Rachaad White and Alexander Madison. All those guys, J.K. Dobbins, goodness, there's so many great running backs going around him that have significantly higher floors and ceilings. So if you draft this guy in the middle rounds, you got to know that he's one of the worst picks at the running back position. Next player on my list is going to be Damien Harris. Now, this is a guy who, you look at his career, right? Last year, 4.4 yards a carry, 29th in the NFL, 4.6 yards per touch. Now, obviously, he was dealing with an injury last year, so that might have messed with his efficiency metrics a little bit, but you look back at 2021, 4.6 yards per carry, 25th in the NFL, 4.8 yards per touch, 25th in the NFL. This dude has never been efficient on a per carry or a per touch basis. We know that he is not an elite pass catching back. There's a reason Ramondre Stevenson took over the backfield. I called that last season. I told you Ramondre Harris is going to take Damien Harris's job 100%. I got tons of pushback on it. Look what happened. Now Ramondre is one of the better running backs in the league, as we know, and in a very good situation. And Damien Harris is now on a Buffalo Bills team where he's going to be completely touchdown dependent as well. Look, this guy is going to be a goal line battering ram and nothing less. And we're in an offense here where Josh Allen's going to siphon a ton of those touchdowns. So unless by some crazy fluke he manages to score 12 or 13 touchdowns, which is not going to happen, then he's going to be worthless for fantasy. He doesn't have any involvement in the passing game. He's in a backfield that just doesn't really get a whole lot of opportunity share, right? The Bills run their offense through the passing game. That's just what they do. So there's also two other backs in the backfield. He's going to have a lot of competition from James Cook as far as carries. And so considering the fact that the only way he has a productive season is to fall into the end zone 12 or 13 times, you got to avoid him in fantasy. Josh Allen's also going to take his rushing touchdowns away. This guy's a massive avoid, and he honestly just isn't very good. Next player on my list is going to be Deontay Johnson. Now, you look at Deontay Johnson's last 3 seasons, he is one of the most targeted wide receivers in the NFL and has been for 3 seasons in a row, and yet never has a good fantasy finish. This is a sign of a wide receiver just really not being very good. Now, I understand that there are some Deontay Johnson truthers out there that think he has a ton of talent. I disagree. George Pickens is going to take over in this offense, guys. I'm telling you, there is such a massive gap in talent between George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. The drafting Deontay Johnson right around George Pickens is just silly. We have a 3-year sample size, and we can see that Deontay Johnson will fail no matter how much target share he gets. Okay? 2022, 6th in the league in targets. 2021, 2nd in the league in targets. 2020, 6th in the league in targets. So he's finished top 6 in the league in targets 3 seasons in a row, and yet 2022, he was 39th in fantasy points per game. The one season where he had good fantasy points per game efficiency metrics was 2021, where he had 17.2 fantasy points per game. That's the only decent season that Deontay Johnson has ever had, and this is coming on being the 2nd most targeted wide receiver in the league. You give any talented wide receiver that sort of target share, and they will have more than 17.2 fantasy points per game for sure. 2020, 14.8 fantasy points per game on being 6th in the league in targets, and this was only 22nd in the league as far as fantasy points per game. So this dude just does not produce enough on his opportunities to be considered a good wide receiver. In fact, I would argue that he just sucks. Look, if a wide receiver gets this kind of target share and produces these kind of numbers that really just aren't that good as far as overall fantasy points, it's pretty much just a sign that the wide receiver isn't that good. And if you watch him play and you watch George Pickens play, there's just such a clear difference in overall talent. So taking Deontay Johnson at the same spot in the draft as George Pickens just isn't smart. Kenny Pickett clearly favors George Pickens. So just go with the more talented wide receiver that we know is eventually going to break out and be a wide receiver one in the NFL. Next player on my list is going to be Miles Sanders. Now, the Eagles' offensive line made Miles Sanders look good last season. And even with the best offensive line in the NFL, he only averaged 4.9 yards per carry and 4.8 yards per touch. This is not very good yards per carry and yards per touch efficiency for running behind an offensive line that is clearly the best in the NFL. If you look at his yards created per touch, 1.86 yards created per touch, which was 50th in the NFL. That's how many yards he creates after bouncing out the first tackle, after getting the yards that the offensive line creates for him. So he really wasn't getting any additional yardage outside of what the offensive line just handed him, right? So this is not a good sign. And so, 259 carries, 8th in the NFL, 11 touchdowns, 9th in the NFL. These are the reasons he had good fantasy numbers. He was on the best offense in the league, arguably, in the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was falling into the end zone because, he was getting carries and carries within the red zone. This is not going to happen on the Panthers. This team is not going to be able to carry him into elite fantasy production. They don't have nearly as good of an offensive line as Philly. They don't have nearly as good of a quarterback. I mean, we're going to see how good Bryce Young is, but there's no way he matches the efficiency of Jalen Hurts last year. And all in all, you have a significantly worse football team, a polar opposite football team from the Philadelphia Eagles. Miles Sanders is not going to be able to sustain any sort of production like that in that offense. The only reason he's going in the middle rounds is because people only remember what they saw last year, and they know that he has a potential workhorse role coming. But even with a workhorse role, this dude isn't going to be able to produce any sort of yards per carry efficiency or touchdown upside in this offense. He's a massive avoid, and he's honestly really just not that good. Next player on my list is Daniel Jones. Now, I am utterly sick of people trying to tell me that Daniel Jones belongs in the top 10 quarterback conversation for this coming season. I'm very aware that he finished as the quarterback 9 last year. I understand that, but you got to keep in mind, Dak Prescott missed 5 games last year. Lamar Jackson missed 5 games last year. Justin Herbert had a rib injury all season. Okay, Deshaun Watson didn't get to play the whole season. Okay, there were so many quarterbacks that would have 100% finished ahead of Daniel Jones, 100%, if they weren't dealing with injuries or suspensions or whatever it was that caused them to have flukishly low numbers due to either missing games or underperforming because being on the field with injury, whatever it may be. All of those quarterbacks would have outperformed Daniel Jones easily, so he would have been way outside of the top 10, and this was the best season he will ever have. Okay, Daniel Jones had 7 rushing touchdowns last season. This is an absolute joke. He will never have 7 rushing touchdowns again. It will not happen. He was 3rd in the league in rushing touchdowns, which is absolutely fluky. This dude is not that great of a runner. Now, does he run with the ball every now and then and produce some sort of efficient rushing? Yes, but the dude's not that fast. He's not overly athletic. Okay, so to expect for him to produce rushing upside season in and season out is just not smart, okay? The rushing upside was fluky last season. He was only middle of the league in passing yards with 3,200 passing yards, 15th in the NFL. The only reason he snuck his way into the top 10 last year was because all those quarterbacks were hurt that would have easily finished ahead of him no matter what, and he had a ridiculous number of rushing touchdowns, 7, that won't ever happen again. You can look at his 2 seasons before. He only had a total of 3 rushing touchdowns in his first 2 seasons, and he comes out and has 7 rushing touchdowns last year. This was one of the biggest flukes in all of fantasy at the quarterback position. This dude is not a top 10 quarterback. He has no business in that conversation. So I just don't want people to come at me with, hey, Daniel Jones should be on the top 10. He should absolutely not. There is no way in the world this dude finishes top 10 this year. He's really not that good of a player. All right, guys, I appreciate you tuning into the video. It was good to talk about some players that suck. It was enjoyable. It was fun. So make sure to avoid these guys in your draft because they're just not very good. All right, catch you guys later.